Hello and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep IAS. Before we begin today's session of the comprehensive news analysis, an important announcement. Byju's Exam Prep IAS is bringing for you the National Scholarship Test that will be held on 20th of February 11 a.m. The last date to register for this test is 19th of Feb till 6 p.m. The link to register is given in the description of the video. This test gives you a chance to win up to 90% scholarship on the Byju's Exam Prep IAS courses. So register in large numbers and see how prepared are you for the prelims examinations. Now let's begin our session with the first article that talks about the fact that over the years we have realized that the significance of high courts in India, the powers and the prestige of the high courts is on a constant decline, which is a negative sign for our judicial system. The authors here are making a point that the emergence of tribunals and the Supreme Court taking up a lot of trivial matters overlooking the jurisdiction of the High Court has now meant that the High Courts in India are stuck between the tribunals and the Supreme Court, and most of their decisions anyways are overturned by the Supreme Court. And that is why there is almost a crisis of existence for these high courts, which we need to look into. The authors here say that if you look at the Indian constitution, you will realize that federalism is an integral part of India's constitution. So much so that it has been considered as a part of constitution's basic structure. However, whenever we talk about federalism in India, we mainly refer to it as federalism at the executive level and at the legislative level. Because we have been told from the very beginning that India has followed an integrated model of judiciary, which is true. Our judiciary, unlike the US, is not divided into state courts or the center government courts. However, the fact is that there are specific powers given to high courts and the Supreme Courts as well. And over the past few years, the powers of the High Court, knowingly or unknowingly, have been on a decline. If you look at the speech that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had given in the Constituent Assembly on the matter of India's higher judiciary, he said that India's federation, though it is a dual polity, we do not have a dual judiciary at all. The High Courts and the Supreme Court form one single integrated judiciary. For example, if you have a case against a state government or if you have to appeal against a state government law, you can go to High Court also and the same matter can go to Supreme Court also. Similarly, if you have an issue with the center government law, you don't just need to go to Supreme Court, you can go to the High Court as well. Unlike the US, where there are separate courts for listening to the state government matters and there are separate courts called the federal courts that will look into the center government matter. As for Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, that will not be the case in India. While this part is clear, there is a slight confusion over the status of the judges. Many of us assume that the judges in the High Court would be subordinate to those in the Supreme Court, which is not really the case. If you look at the Constitution carefully, you will realize the fact that there is equality of powers given to the High Court judges and to the Supreme Court judges, in the sense that both of them can hear certain matters. For example, if there is a case regarding the violation of your constitutional rights, you can go to Supreme Court or to the High Court. For instance, if there is a case regarding violation of your fundamental rights, you can go to Supreme Court also and you can go to the High Court also. Most of the cases in the Supreme Court can also be heard at the High Court level. So we cannot assume that the High Court judge is a subordinate to the Supreme Court judge. This is just a perception that has been developed in our minds, but that is not the case. In fact, if you look at the history, there have been instances, especially when the Supreme Court was newly formed, that when a Supreme Court seat was offered to certain High Court judges, they actually refused. The two famous examples are of Chief Justices of the Bombay High Court and the Madras High Court, who were offered to become a Supreme Court judge when the court was newly formed. Both of them rejected the offer, thinking that being the Chief Justice of a High Court would be more prestigious for them rather than being a common judge in the Supreme Court. Thus, if you look at the history, especially when the Supreme Court was formed, there was no perception that a Supreme Court judge would be higher as compared to a High Court judge. However, especially since the 1990s, this balance has been tilted. When we say 1990s, we are mainly referring to the three judges' cases. Since then, the manner in which the Supreme Court has conducted itself and how they have taken a lot of powers in their hands has now tilted the balance of power in favor of the Supreme Court. The article here gives three examples of how the Supreme Court has been taking over most of the functions. First, the collegium system. The collegium system that has the Supreme Court judges only, that is the Chief Justice of India, and apart from him, the four senior most Supreme Court judges, they are the ones who have been given the power to recommend who shall be the next judge in the High Court. They have been given the power to even recommend the transfer of judges from one High Court to the other, and they are the ones who decide who shall be the next judge in the Supreme Court. In the entire procedure, almost no role has been given to the High Court judges. So once it has been established that a judge sitting in the Supreme Court shall decide who shall be the next judge in the High Court, it has kind of shifted the balance of equation in favor of the Supreme Court judges and has established the fact that Supreme Court judges are superior, if not the boss, of the High Court judges. The second example that the article gives is that over the years there have been emergence of a lot of tribunals, and many of these tribunals have been given the power similar to those of the High Court. So much so that after the award of the tribunal is given, if you have to appeal against it, you have to go directly to the Supreme Court and not to the High Court. Which means that somewhere indirectly, we are undermining the powers of the High Court since the tribunals have come in. The third example that is given here is that the Supreme Court, although being the highest court of the land, is now engaging and spending a lot of its time in hearing those matters which could have been easily given to the lower courts. For example, in the past few years, Supreme Court has heard petitions about whether or not Diwali celebration should be held. The Supreme Court, for example, spent a lot of days in deciding that only for a few hours in the evening Diwali celebrations will be allowed. Then the Supreme Court even spent its precious time in deciding the adequate height for Dahi Handi celebrations. If you look at why the Supreme Court was established, it was established to hear constitutional matters, the matters which actually require interpretation of the constitution, the matters where center versus the state would be an issue, or matters where the two state governments would go head to head. But for that court to hear such trivial matters means that the Supreme Court is interested in concentrating as much powers in their hand and not allowing the High Court to hear those matters. And the article says that it is not just in India. Many countries across the world have this problem where the Supreme Courts have been taking a lot of power in their hands. For example, in the US, research shows that the US Supreme Court is far more likely to strike down a state government law as unconstitutional as compared to a central government law. Because the US Supreme Court thinks that their decision to strike down a state government law would not have a lot of criticism of it. Similarly, in Nigeria, which is a federal country similar to India, the Supreme Court favors the jurisdiction of the central government on most of the matters as compared to the state governments. And our judiciary seems to be going in the same direction. Over the years, we have increasingly seen that when an appeal is made in the Supreme Court from the High Court, the Supreme Court overturns it, which gives a signal that it doesn't matter what the High Court has ruled, we are here and we can overturn it. This also has hurt the prestige of the High Court in the past few years. All of this has made the High Courts kind of redundant. If you look at the history, High Courts are far older as compared to the Supreme Courts. While the High Courts in India started coming up in 1861, the Supreme Court that we have today only came up in 1950. Not to say that the High Courts are more prestigious, but we have to understand that the legacy of High Courts in India is extremely old and we cannot just undermine their working with every passing year. Now, just to show you what the article is trying to point out, there have been a lot of tribunals set up for different fields in the country. While for some of these tribunals, you can appeal their decision in the High Court, but many of these tribunals now work in such a manner that if you have to appeal against their decision, you have to go to Supreme Court. In other words, these tribunals have been given a status comparable or equal to that of the High Court. Take an example of CAT, the Central Administrative Tribunal. From there, the appeal will go to the Supreme Court directly. Similar is the case with the Securities Appellate Tribunal. Then comes the Telecom Dispute Settlement and Appellate Tribunal, the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, so on and so forth. There are a lot of tribunals right now from where the appeals will go to Supreme Court and not the High Court. Thus, they have been given a status at par with the High Court, which on the other hand is a constitutional authority. This is what the authors say should not have been the case, and we need to go back on this. Since a lot of you have been commenting on the videos that you want to know about the important Supreme Court cases on certain matters, so I thought let me share with you some important cases in which the Supreme Court has given some directions about how the tribunals would function with respect to the High Court. For example, in the SP Sampath Kumar case of 1986, the Supreme Court said it is constitutionally valid for the Parliament to create alternative institutions to the High Court with jurisdiction over certain matters, that the alternate body has the same efficacy as the High Court, and thus tribunals can be created. Similarly, in the Chandra Kumar case of 1997, the Supreme Court said a tribunal that substitutes the High Court as an alternative institutional mechanism must have the status of the High Court. So basically, appellate tribunals were given the status of the High Court by the Supreme Court itself. Thus, it is not the parliament or the government that has increased the powers of tribunal over the year. It is in fact the Supreme Court that has increased the power of tribunal and made it at par with the high courts in the country. The next article that we have here focuses on the future of cryptocurrencies in India, especially considering the fact that in this year's budget, the finance minister announced a 30% flat tax rate on any gains made by the transfer of virtual assets, which include the cryptocurrency and the NFT, non-fungible tokens. Now, what exactly are NFTs? In very simple terms, NFT or non-fungible tokens are kind of a precious commodity that someone exclusively owns. For example, I have made a painting which is originally mine and it has a lot of value. If I start selling that, that can be called a non-fungible token. There may be digital copies available, but the original painting would have its own charm. So a lot of celebrities now are selling their stuff. Some are selling their signed t-shirts, some are selling their first music CDs, etc. Those are called NFTs. Now, on any gain made on the NFTs or the cryptocurrencies, the finance minister has said that a 30% flat tax rate will be charged. Now, the interesting part is the government till now has not decided whether or not cryptocurrency is even legal in India. But the government thought of at least imposing a tax till the time that we are deciding on the question of the legality. Also understand that the article here is written by three people, out of whom one of the person is actually an entrepreneur who is building an NFT platform, and that is why the theme of the entire article is that the government should not have charged such a high rate of interest, because this writer's app would then not be profitable, and the government should try to legalize cryptocurrency as soon as possible. So it is written from the entrepreneur's point of view rather than saying that the government should be careful. The theme of the article is that the government should reduce the tax and the government should ensure that the cryptocurrencies are becoming a legal commodity in India as soon as possible. So the article starts by saying that many critics of this policy of the government, including the author himself, think that the 30% tax rate is too high. Because of that high tax rate, the investors would not be willing to convert their cryptocurrency into Indian rupee, because once they do that, they would have to pay a tax of 30%. Rather, the people who are investing in cryptocurrency would like to earn more money through decentralized finance. Now, what is decentralized finance? This means that now using cryptocurrency, you can undertake a lot of banking operations. For example, lending money to someone, taking money from someone else, taking loans in the form of cryptocurrency, all of that without any bank being in between. That is called decentralized finance. It would be a peer-to-peer operation. Peer-to-peer means, for example, if you want to take money or you want to take a loan, right now you go to a bank. The bank gives you someone else's money, and that is how the bank acts as an intermediary. On the other hand, if you go directly to the person who is offering you the money and there is no bank in between, that will be called peer-to-peer transaction. The problem with peer-to-peer transaction is, since there is no bank in between, there is no guarantee. Right now, even if you don't return the loan to the bank will still pay the other person whose money it is that the bank was circulating. But in peer-to-peer transaction, there is no intermediary. But with cryptocurrency, as per the author, it will be much more safer, and this is all called decentralized finance. So for someone who is investing money in cryptocurrency, rather than the people cashing it and then having to pay tax to the government, they would rather be in a business of decentralized finance, giving their bitcoins or other currencies on loan and then earn money from that. And that is why if the government wants to bring the cryptocurrency into the mainstream market, they have to think about reducing the taxes. Adopting cryptocurrencies would enable quicker and faster transactions as compared to any banks that we have. Also, if you look at people who are investing in cryptocurrencies in India or around the world, those are not very rich people, barring a few exceptions. They are mostly small to medium sized enterprises or lower end high net individuals who are trying to make a living or who are trying to make a business out of the crypto world. But for them, again, it will be extremely difficult to venture into the cryptocurrency era if there are so high taxes that have been imposed. It is looking like a letter that the author is trying to write to the government because the author himself is establishing such a platform where cryptocurrencies can be traded. In India, as I said, there is no clarity over crypto apart from the fact that it will be taxed from now onwards. Another interesting announcement that was made in the budget was about the RBI's central bank digital currency. Although it seems to be a similar thing to crypto, but it is actually not. The RBI's digital currency will still be under the control of the RBI, thus that it will be in the digital form. So the government might be pushing people towards accepting digital currency, maybe with an intention that in the future crypto can also be allowed once the people are okay with the idea of digital currency. But still, there is no clarity over whether or not the government will legalize it in the near future. The authors say that rather than taxing the cryptocurrency to such a high extent, the solution is in bringing more regulations, build a proper framework so that anyone who is looking to make a career in crypto can actually use it for everyone's betterment. Also, with the help of proper regulations, we can make sure that it is not used in illegitimate political funding. A few months back, if you would have seen, especially in Karnataka, there was a Bitcoin scam that came out, under which there was a techie who was mining Bitcoins, and then those were used illegally in the political funding, and a lot of politicians' names also came out. So, political funding, which requires black money to a large extent, has also become a great application of cryptocurrency. If the government really wants to control that, as per the authors, rather than thinking of taxing it at a high rate, government should think about bringing regulations as soon as possible. Not just this, the author suggests that the government should also talk to partners from across the world, people who have been working in this field. Since crypto, anyways, is not a very old technology, it is still evolving. The government would do well to talk to experts, bring them on board, and according to their own expertise, form the policies regarding blockchain that can be beneficial for the entire country. Now, all this is the status of cryptocurrency in India. How about the other countries around the world? How are they managing crypto? Let's take an example of a few. In US, for instance, there are different rules depending on state to state. Mostly, most of the states are positive towards cryptocurrency. For example, the New York state in 2016 itself launched a licensing framework called BitLicense for businesses and crypto exchanges. China by far has been one of those countries that has been the harshest towards cryptocurrency. In fact, they completely banned mining of cryptocurrency in June 2021. When they decided that, it almost stopped 40% of the total crypto mining operations around the world. China, in fact, on the other hand, is developing a digital version of their currency, yuan, and have already started real world trials of that particular variant of their currency. UK, on the other hand, does not have a specific legislation for cryptocurrency right now, and it is being governed by Financial Conduct Authority, which grants license for crypto businesses and exchanges. Singapore, also similar to the UK, is trying to make policies with regards to crypto, and it is being implemented by the Payment Services Act in Singapore. The one interesting exemption in all this is El Salvador. It is the first country in the entire world to officially declare a Bitcoin as a legal tender. However, opinion polls show that the people of El Salvador are not really interested in using it, and most of the people have rejected the idea of using this in their day to day life. In fact, they will keep using the US dollar, which is the predominant currency in El Salvador. This is where most of the nations lie with respect to the cryptocurrency around the world. The next article that we have is a small one with regards to the latest inflation numbers released in India. The inflation numbers, as per the Consumer Price Index in the month of January, were about 6.01%, which is very slightly above the RBI's upper limit of inflation that is pegged at 6%. As you know, the ideal limit for inflation in India is 4% plus minus 2%. So the upper limit is 6% and we have reached 6.01. Specifically, the people living in the rural areas, the rural population that have a lower earning as compared to the urban areas, those are the ones who are bearing the brunt much more as compared to the urban population. The reason behind this inflation and the rise of prices is rising food prices, including the rise in the price of oil and fats. In fact, there has been a sharp increase of 18.7% in the price of oil and fats, which has increased the overall food inflation across the country. However, the RBI still says that in the long term, in the entire financial year 2023, the inflation would still be 4.5%. So the RBI in turn believes that in the future, the inflation will go down in the coming months. The article here, however, says that there is a need to worry. For instance, globally, if you see, the prices of crude oil have been increasing, especially because of the tensions between Ukraine and Russia. In fact, the global crude prices reached a 7-year high earlier this week. The reason why it has not translated in India is because we are in the middle of the elections and the political parties in power, that is why, don't want to increase the oil prices neither at the center government level nor at the state government level. And that is why the common people of India have not realized the fact that once the elections are over, most probably we will see a very rude and drastic increase in the crude oil prices because the global prices have increased considerably. That means in the coming months, the inflation will not decrease, rather, it will increase as compared to where we are right now. Add to that the problem that our current consumption expenditure is still not at the pre pandemic level. Current consumption expenditure is a good indication of what is the earning potential and how much are the people earning right now. The more you earn, the more you consume. The lesser you consume means there is lesser demand in the market, and that is why the businesses would not be able to sell their stuff. The RBI here, however, is still optimistic and in their latest monetary policy report have not sounded any alarm whatsoever. It is also important to understand what exactly is this monetary policy and why does the RBI come out with these numbers such as the SLR, CRR, etc. The monetary policy report is published by the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI. This committee is headed by the RBI governor himself. Monetary Policy Committee is a statutory and institutionalized framework formed under the RBI Act of 1934. The main mandate is to maintain the price stability and keeping in mind the objective of the overall growth of the country. This committee determines the policy interest rate, that is a repo rate, which is required to achieve inflation. As I said, the inflation target is 4% plus minus 2%. So the upper limit becomes 6% while the lower limit becomes 2%. And that is why, because we have reached 6.01, we have very slightly breached this limit under the RBI Act of 1934. The next article that we have here talks about a problem that we might not be facing right now as a country, but it will become a major problem in the next 10 to 20 years. That is a problem of handling the solar waste. That is mainly because at the one hand, we are trying to increase our capacity of solar power generation without realizing the fact that it would also mandate us to handle solar waste much more effectively. Right now in the country, we don't have any specific method of reusing or recycling the solar waste, and thus we might start facing this problem once our solar panels become old and once they have lived up their entire life. Recently, the International Renewable Energy Agency estimated that the global photovoltaic waste will touch 78 million tons by 2050. And in this, India would be one of the top 5 generators of this waste. Right now in India, the solar waste is not recycled or refurbished specifically, and it's considered as a part of the electronic waste only, which is not the ideal policy. The government said recently that a committee has been constituted under the chairmanship of the Secretary of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. The plan is to have a circular economy. Circular economy mainly is a phrase that is used to identify what parts from this solar power panel can be used in some other sector, and then maybe that other sector will provide input for the third sector, so on and so forth. So no part of the waste material should go to waste, and rather we should take it out and use it somewhere else. That is what a circular economy is. Right now, there are no government facilities as such to handle the solar waste in India. But the government says that a pilot facility has been set up for solar panel recycling by a private company in Tamil Nadu. Now, in the coming years, as India goes ahead to meet its target of solar energy generation, the number of solar ways that we have would also increase considerably. India, as you know, has set a target of producing 100 gigawatts of solar energy by 2022. Right now, the total capacity of grid connected solar photovoltaic installations in India is about 40 gigawatts. Now, most of these solar panels have a life of about 25 years. Considering the fact that India's solar manufacturing started mainly from 2010, that means that most of these panels should work perfectly till at least 2035. And after that, we'll face a problem of recycling or refurbishing these solar panels. So we are still at least 12 to 13 years away from facing this problem in a major way. But the Council for Energy, Environment and Water has pointed out that while the entire solar panels would have a life of 25 years, a lot of small equipments and a lot of small installations inside these panels have already started to turn bad, and we need to think about this problem immediately. There are several stages where modules could get damaged, and these modules during their defections are discarded even before their lifespan is over. In fact, it is estimated that nearly 285,000 tons of solar waste was created in financial year 2021. And as we increase our solar capacity, this waste would only go higher. Now, just to give you an idea, this is not just India, but nations across the world are scaling up their solar power generation. Just see this graph to understand how fast has solar energy generation picked up around the world. From about 1.3 gigawatts in the year 2000, in 2019, it has reached close to 600 gigawatts. Also, if you look at the country-wise distribution and how countries have started to use solar power, you will see that India sits at the fifth place behind China, Japan, US, and Germany. Thus, the more solar power that you generate, the more will be your solar waste that you would have to take care of. And that is why India cannot overlook this issue. Now, what exactly are the problems that we face in recycling of solar waste? These are some of the issues, starting with the policy and economic barriers. Most nations across the world don't have a proper legislative framework. There is no proper law in India about how to recycle the solar waste. As we just saw, we don't even consider solar waste as a separate form of a waste. We consider it as a part of the electronic waste. Secondly, the recycling cost also is pretty high. It might cost you $20 to $30 to recycle a solar panel, while just dumping it in a landfill would only cost you $1 to $2. So there is at least a tenfold increase in the price. There are also no incentives for collecting or recycling of this waste. There are market barriers also. Right now, we don't have such a lot of solar waste that is enough to keep running an entire plant. And until the volume of the solar waste increases, running such a plant might not be economically viable. Also, the supply chain in this particular field is not really available in India and many other countries across the world. Not just this, from the consumer side also, asking them to return their solar panels that are at the end of life stage might not be very feasible. For example, even right now in India, when you buy LEDs, CFLs, tube lights, there is a provision that when they go bad, you can return it to the same company. Like if you had a tube light of Philips, you can return it to Philips only. But how many of you actually make a call to Philips, set up an appointment so that their person can come to your place and collect those equipment? Hardly anyone does that because at the end consumer, there is no incentive for doing that. Then there are environmental barriers also. Recycling process is energy intensive and there is no better solution that has been found in this particular regard. The next article that we have talks about an abstract concept of liberty. It is based on an interesting article that was actually published in the form of essay in 1958, written by Isaiah Berlin. The title of the essay was Two Concepts of Liberty. In this essay, the author talked about two types of liberties that any human being usually has: positive liberty and negative liberty. Let's try and understand this from a very simple point of view. For example, I am an individual and I want to buy a car right now. Now, if there are no restrictions from the side of the government, that means the government is not stopping me from buying a car, the government has not imposed any quota, the government is not charging extra money. So, if I don't have any restrictions from the side of the government, that means I have negative liberty. In a negative liberty sense, an individual is free to do whatever he or she wants without any interference from the state, from the individuals, etc. On the other hand, if I say that I want to buy that car, the government is not stopping me. But what is stopping me is that I don't even have enough money. If the car is for 30 lakh rupees, I don't even have 3 lakh rupees. And that is why I'm not able to buy that car. That means I don't have positive liberty. So positive liberty comes from your own ability. Positive liberty comes from your own economic status. Can you afford something or not? Negative liberty means that the government should not stop you from doing these things. That is the difference between the two. Now, how is it connected to today's day to day governance? Depending upon the kind of party in power or depending upon the kind of government that we have in power, the governments might focus on positive liberty or negative liberty. Let's take a very simple example. In liberal countries, in capitalist countries such as the US, etc., they would want that there has to be negative liberty, that the government will not restrict the businesses from doing their business in whatever way that they want, that the government will not remain a stumbling block if you have to open up a company. You're allowed to freely conduct yourself in whatever way that you want. So, in a liberal country, you would see that there's a lot of negative liberty that is given. On the other hand, to ensure positive liberty means to ensure that people have enough money in their pocket to buy whatever they want, or people have enough money in their pocket to enjoy a good life, to ensure that there is positive liberty. The governments, what they do is they tax the rich people. Let's go back to the same example of earlier. Government is not stopping me from buying anything, but the reason why I'm not being able to buy a car is because I don't have the money. Now, if the government decides that government will give me the money to buy a car, then government will ensure positive liberty by helping the people. How does that happen? The government will start taxing the rich people and provide money to the poor people. That is what the governments usually do when they provide subsidies to ensure that farmers and poor people can sustain a good life. So the idea of positive liberty means that you have to tax the rich people and give certain minimum standard of life to the poor people. The idea of negative liberty means that the government will not interfere and will allow you to live your life in whatever way that you want. Now, you can say that in a socialist country or in a welfare state such as India, the government has to ensure positive liberty. That is how the poor people will be able to sustain. But the article says that positive liberty can be very detrimental. For example, in the past, you take the example of Soviet Union, where the governments used to tax rich people, saying that we will utilize the money for the poor people, but it was used by the government to make its own ends meet. There was a lot of corruption within the government. On the other hand, negative liberty has its own negative aspects. Negative liberty means government not interfering, allowing the people to live the life in the manner that they want. But when there is so much negative liberty, when you don't put any restrictions, that means that there can be a social chaos. For example, if I tell you right now that the government is not stopping you from doing anything, that is, there is no speed limit on the highway, there are no traffic signals, you can drive your car in whatever manner that you want. That is the government ensuring negative freedom. The government ensuring that there is no restrictions put on your life. Then would it be good for you? No, because there will be chaos. Everyone will be driving at 150, 200 kilometers per hour. No one will be stopping at the red light. That will also lead to chaos. So too much of positive liberty or too much of negative liberty, both of them can lead to certain kind of problems. And that is why there has to be a line drawn in between the two somewhere to ensure a good life. Now, when you get these kind of topics like liberty, freedom to write in your essay or ethics paper or even in your GS2 paper, you can quote some examples of good philosophers. Let me discuss with you examples of two thinkers in very brief and how you can quote them. If you have political science optional, you might have read about these two thinkers. Otherwise, also in ethics, you read about these two thinkers. J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill, was a thinker that actually propagated the idea of liberty. Amongst the many ideas that he gave was the idea of self-regarding action and others regarding action. That means if you are performing an action which is self-regarding, means which only impacts you, then the government should give you 100% liberty. On the other hand, others regarding action means any action that will have an impact on others as well. For that, the government must impose restrictions. Let me give you an example. For example, if you're driving a car without wearing a seat belt and you engage in an accident, then it will harm you and no one else because you did not wear the seat belt. That is a self regarding action. So, wearing a seat belt as per JS Mill should not be made compulsory. On the other hand, if you're driving beyond the speed limit, you can harm others as well. That is called others regarding action. On that, there should be certain restrictions imposed. So there have been different kind of ideas of liberty. Liberty should be allowed by the government to what extent? In that, you can always give an example of JS Mill and self-regarding and other regarding action. Secondly, you can also give the idea of Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, the famous British thinker, he gave the idea that if you don't have a power that restricts the people's liberty, if you allow the people to live their life in whatever manner that you want, if there is no ultimate power like the king or the queen, or there is no ultimate authority, there will always be social chaos. For example, the examples that I gave you earlier, if there are no traffic lights, if there are no speed limits, if there are no laws in the country, then there will not be any stop to social chaos. Thus, as per Hobbes, if you want a society that lives in an orderly manner, you need to give a lot of powers to one single authority that can control the life of the people to make the life of everyone better. This is what Thomas Hobbes called the idea of Leviathan. In other words, Hobbes was someone who supported the concept of dictatorship but only in the interest of people. So, whenever you have debate about freedom and liberty, you can always quote from these particular thinkers. These were the articles we wanted to discuss from the Hindu newspaper. Just a couple of practice questions. Number one, for a robust judicial framework, the high courts in India need to be empowered to fulfill their constitutional mandate. Comment. Second, while hailing solar energy as the future, we are overlooking the issues related to solar waste handling. Suggest some ways to address this problem. Both the questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.